Well, I mean, I just saw last week that you officially retired.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. It's yeah, it was big. It was definitely not how I envisioned 2020 to pan out. I mean, I did plan to retire this year, but it was going to be after the Paralympic Games. So yeah, thanks. I think it was. I did like it was hard, but it was the right decision in the end. And I guess it's all about process and mindset and reflection, and priority and planning, and a real appreciation for me it was a reflective time on more awareness and I guess a more of appreciation actually for what I had done in sport, not about what I hadn't. And as athletes, we are very just easily drawn to what's next, what's more, the next challenge. And that's great. That's a really good aspect of athlete and performance and people that are just naturally driven to achieve. And but after a while, it can bring us undone. And I think this was a really good time to pause initially when COVID happened and everything went into lockdown and the games were postponed. So I'm thankful that I had that time to reflect on all that. And in the end, it was the right decision, and I'm in a good place. I'm not saying it was easy. I definitely went through a lot of the stuff mentally. I had to work really hard through some stuff, and came out the other end. So, yeah, I've now moved into a role that is where I actually wanted to go career-wise post my athletic career, and that's in athlete well-being and engagement. And as a registered psychologist myself, my passion is around mental health and well-being in high performance sport. So that is where I've ended up. So that was an opportunity that was there that I thought, well, if it's there now, I'm going to see how far I can go. And I was fortunate enough to be given that opportunity. So I'm wrapped in a
Right.
sport that I was doing. So it's win-win.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But what was the reflection process like? I mean, I can only imagine COVID not only gave you time, but it also gave you, I would say, the silence as well, because activities were limited as well. So what was that reflection like? What went through your mind?
Honestly, initially, well, it was interesting. So I came, when was it? End of February, we had our first, which ended up being our last international race of the season. And I had a lot of mental sort of hurdles that I'd been working on with my sports psych to overcome. And that was the first opportunity to actually put it into practice at that race. So I had ended up finishing that race. I actually nailed it from a performance perspective. So it was probably one of my best races to date. And I was so wrapped by that. And for me, it was almost like this is before I even before COVID, we even really knew about it. Like, wow, finally for me, I'd always had a real struggle mentally and physically with pushing through the pain barrier in racing, but specifically in the run. Swim and bike, I could smash myself, whereas it came to the run, it was a lot more of a mental challenge. And I'd done some amazing work with my coach physically as well, and then the work with the sports psych. So this race was almost like I surprised myself. I exceeded my expectations on my time for the run, and I was wrapped. So it was kind of like my gold medal moment. We think about what we're out there to achieve, and for me, I've always been an athlete that races for process and not for outcome, and just really testing myself and what I can achieve and what I learn about myself, and more so what I'm capable of as an athlete. So I got so much out of that. But I also knew that the commitment for Tokyo, that was my timeline to Tokyo. So there was only a few more months in my career as an athlete, and I was happy with that. We have a little 2-year-old, and sport is a very big commitment as a family. And being a mum, there's so many hats I have to wear. So I was all set mentally, physically, and the family were all in on it and ready for the next few months of that point. So I was in a great place physically and mentally, but I also was in a great place because I probably knew my career was this was the swan song, right? So it was definitive. There was a definitive end. So I just wanted to leave no holes sort of unturned or anything. Like, I wanted to leave, regardless of my performance at Tokyo. It was all about knowing I had done everything possible so I could walk away a happy athlete, because races don't always go the way, and this is a whole thing around identity with athletes, but it doesn't matter where you come, because you can still have an amazing race depending on the self-worth and identity that you have around sport and performance and the key learnings you get along the way. So then COVID kind of hit, and initially I was like, oh, as the whole world was like, oh shit, basically, like, this sucks. So it was really hard. And then I was like, the games are going to go ahead. The games are going to go ahead. And then after a while, when I couldn't train, I was kind of like, oh, this is nice. Actually, like, I hate to admit it, but it was nice to have that bit of a rest. And then the whole reality of it all kicked in. And then I was thinking, okay, how is Tokyo? How are the games going to go ahead? This isn't possible. We can't train. So this is not fair to have the games in a couple of months. Like, we can't do this. Anyway, so as much as I would have believed and agreed that the postponement was definitely the right thing to happen, when it actually did happen, it was like, because I was at the final stages of my career, it was a real bitter pill to swallow, and I had to do a lot of soul searching. And for me, really gave me, even though I believed I was prepared for the next chapter post sport, there's no denying the stuff that athletes go through when they retire is tough, and it's hard. And for me, I had to do a lot of reflection in the sense of being okay to be in that really shitty space, and to navigate through it. And I think for me, having some insight as a psych, I kind of had a bit more awareness of my thoughts. But I really, I guess when it happened, I really had to practice what I preach as a psych and around mindset and mindfulness. And my sports psych, we did a bit of work. Even I would challenge him, like, I'd sort of be like, okay, I'm retired. And then the next session I'd be like, no, I'm going to keep going. And then, so, and I think that the key lesson out of that was just have the conversations. Don't hold it in. Like, you can say one thing and change your mind. That's okay. But you just have to sort of problem solve through it. So it was it was a tough time. But I was really thankful to be able to spend a bit more time with my son during the day. And I ended up coming to a place where I was like, I knew that I couldn't do another whole 12 months with the uncertainty and a young family. And I realised how much of my sport is such it is not only like a 7-day-a-week job for me as the athlete, but it is, it's a whole family commitment. And all our holidays revolved around my racing and all that. So, and I just got a bit more awareness around that. And I realized that instead of thinking about what I envisioned my life to plan out to be, it was like, hang on, maybe this is my life now. So maybe I don't go to Tokyo. Maybe that was never a part of the plan. I mean, I've been through stuff before when it hasn't gone right. And it hasn't necessarily meant that because the outcome was different to what I had envisioned, didn't mean that the outcome was going to be a bad one. So I had a little bit of that inside and just did the work and just was patient with myself and navigated through it. And I knew that when I would start doing some training again, how I'd feel about that, if it gave me that desire to keep going, or am I like, you know what? Yeah, I definitely am done. So like with probably a lot of things, but definitely triathlon, it's not a sport you can keep pushing if you know that you think you're done. But I was happy about my decision, so it made it a bit easier.
Yeah, it's always important to be happy. And I like what you said, and I wanted to bring it up before I forget, I suppose, when you mentioned that just because it wasn't the decision you envisioned doesn't mean it wasn't a good one. And I think that's something that's so easy to forget, because in our mind, as you've mentioned, right, like your identity is so, for many of us, not just athletes, is so pegged to the thing we're good at or the thing that we'd like to be known for, that, you know, when it doesn't pan out, you know, we just completely, you know, unfold. So I'm curious when, because I spoke to an Olympic mountain biker from Hong Kong in one of my previous episodes, and she mentioned something similar to what you said. Because I was going to ask you as you were talking, if you considered staying on if the Tokyo Olympics or Paralympics would be postponed to 2021, but you know, like you, she was telling me that it's not really. I mean, if you wanted to, you probably could, but it's just that the sacrifice definitely didn't outweigh the goal anymore. And I'm curious, how was that something that was, you know, resonant in your mind as you reflected through it?
Yeah. And, you know, I'm still kind of in that space of really understanding that as well. But you're definitely right. I could have kept going. The thing that was different this time around is we were living in a first time pandemic like this, and there was so much unknown about that when it came to racing. Yeah, it's really hard. Like, I could have kept going, yes, but I think at the end of the day, at what cost? You know, the other thing too, I had to acknowledge is that I was like age-wise, I was getting older in my career, but also what we put on hold with family and children is being the woman. Like, I have roles to play with, you know, having children, and we wanted to add to the family, and so there was a lot of pressure there. Not from my husband or anything, but more so just the reality of life. And the unfortunate thing is, like, you know, your body clock doesn't wait because of COVID, and
Yeah.
your kids don't stop growing because of COVID. And so the other thing too was financially, athletes a lot like myself, we had sponsors, and we are so, especially in Paralympic sport, we don't have prize money. And I was so thankful to have amazing sponsors on that journey. But that was for the timeline of Tokyo. So because the games extended, it didn't mean a lot of these things extended as well. And you were right when you were saying you're talking to another athlete, you know, does the continuation outweigh the sacrifice or the risk? And it is always about risk and reward. So I did the work about understanding myself as an athlete, and I thought about it. What does it mean? You know, like, I was almost pretty much like unofficially qualified for Tokyo too. So it wasn't like I was in a place where I still had to chase some races to qualify. So it was almost, people probably were always thinking, why? Like, she was so close. But yeah, it is that risk and reward. And I think it's definitely thinking about everyone else involved. And sport has an ending. Everyone's career in sport does have an end date. And that's a reality. And for me, I had to think about the next chapter of my career, and this was probably the right time to focus on that. It does help when you have opportunity there. So a key learning that really came evident for me was the ability that I had. I had a career behind me outside of sport, and I was able to then almost continue that, and I had that to sort of bounce back on. But I don't say bounce back, I'd say bounce forward. So I still had an identity outside of my sport, and I think that is a real thing that I'm so passionate about too, is athletes sort of gaining a bit more awareness. It's not about a profession, but who they are outside of sport. If you're just doing one thing, even if it's like one job, or haven't tried too many other things, that because of its fear of trying or whatever, then you're missing opportunities to understand yourself a bit more. So I was fortunate enough throughout my athletic career as a triathlete that I, was able to navigate career and opportunity. So that helped. And I think what is the hard thing, as you're talking about before, it's not just sport. we're so naturally driven by our ego and to achieve, right? So Tokyo, I
Definitely.
mean, yes, I am not going to deny would love to go to Tokyo. Like, let's not deny that, right? But it wasn't my reality, and I've chosen that, but this is the right choice for me. And I don't know, maybe it's a conversation we have a bit later in a couple of months, but it's an interesting it's interesting. It wasn't just a simple yes or no. It was more about the push and the pull. And I think my mental health too takes a real lot mentally and physically to perform at your best and commit. My sport was 7 days a week. And as I said before, I have so many hats that I wear, and it comes at the cost of to my own mental health. How often I'm trying to multitask and juggle, and then I'm become less of not as good a mother and not as good a wife, and then I'm not so good at my sport. And at the end of the day, I'm the one that suffers. So I think it was really about finding that balance for myself mentally. And now when I still train, but it's for me, and I had to find that real sense. So it was more about really losing the ego. We kind of and being vulnerable, and it's so easy to be driven by ego. I still wouldn't mind a gold medal, but you just got to go. You can't just hold on to what ifs and whatever. And that's right. Like, I just surrendered to it. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 12 months with sport. There is no calendar. So I'm just going to surrender to it and just go with it. But it was a process for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it's always important to redefine what a gold medal is to you as you move on, right? But I want to talk about the. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
I want to talk about juggling many hats and mental health. But you said something earlier on about how you're really good at cycling and swimming, but it was the mental threshold of running that was really challenging for you. And I'm just really curious about why that is and how you overcame that particular thing, because it's quite if I'm not mistaken, it's the longest aspect of a triathlon, right?
So with triathlon, there's different distances. So for Olympic and Paralympic racing, it's Olympic distance and then sprint distance. So for a sprint distance, which is what we would do for para-triathlon under the ITU, which is International Triathlon Union racing, it would only be sprint. So when I say sprint, the shorter it is, the harder you're going. So
right.
Just remember that if you take up triathlon.
Okay.
And the swim's 750 meters, the cycle's 20k, and the run is 5. So, but for me, I could push myself immensely on the bike for 20k or more and really get in that hurt locker. But when it came to the run, I struggled, and it's a really fascinating story, this one. And so it goes way back to So when I was racing prior on the run, what would happen is I'd sort of hit a point where I couldn't push to beyond, like to really just sit in that hurt locker and run. And I would get almost nauseous, and if we go around a turn, usually do laps, and it just that sort of momentary slowdown of pace, I would get quite nauseous, and I would dry reach a lot. So I struggled with that. And then, but prior to this, so if we go back to 2010, I lost my mum to breast cancer, and she chose not to have any form of Western medicine. So it was very hard to watch her sort of become more ill and unwell and gradually see the effects that something like cancer can have on someone. And I was her full-time carer, and it was a very, very traumatic time in my life. And I was in another sport altogether. Then I was in equestrian, and that when I had sort of come out of that time, unfortunately after Mum passed away, the grief and the pain, the emotional pain that I had gone through with that, almost when I started triathlon, when I would start getting in that pain threshold racing, it would almost would be a positive thing for me, because the emotional pain that I had experienced, I always, in my head, was like, nothing that I do physically will ever be hurt as much as that emotional pain I'd been through. And when I started out in my triathlon career, I had missed out on the Paralympics twice, and that was in equestrian. And there was, I'd always been fascinated by triathlon, but equestrian was kind of my world. And I got to a point in my career where my horse travelled overseas for world championships, and unfortunately didn't travel well. And so the likelihood of us going on another international trip for world championships or the Paralympics was chances were really low. And it's a whole lot of complex stories there, but triathlon was actually debuting at Rio Paralympics, and I started very early on in triathlon in 2014. So, like, I was fresh, really raw. But I had this burning desire to still go to the Paralympics. So when I was training through it, I was still carrying so much grief emotionally, but it got me through. But I was driven so much too because my mum was such a big part of my equestrian career, and our dream together was always to go to the Paralympics. And by hook or crook, I was going, and ironically, I just fell into triathlon in a way and absolutely loved it. And so I was going, but I was going through a lot of emotion. It wasn't just about me wanting to go. I had a job to do, and that was to finish that chapter of that, with my mum. And she was there through that whole initial stages leading up to Rio with me. Even on Rio, like, was tough emotionally. So when it came down to the run, I've never envisioned being a runner. Like, I've never felt it. I wouldn't run if I was being chased, like, so I could swim. I didn't mind. Bike, I took to pretty quickly, but the run was just like, oh, this is weird. So apart from having to learn, like, technically how to run, which took a while, it got to a point where I knew that the Achilles heel of my racing coming into Tokyo was that mindset on the run. And I knew that that's where I had to work, and did so much physically with my coach and technique and strength in the gym. But I had worked over the last couple of years about just even the thought that I didn't see myself as a runner was a blocker. So I just had to work on that with my psych as well, and kind of got over that. And then as I worked through it with my sports psych, we actually identified that what was helping me in sport to sort of navigate through the pain in training and the fatigue with what I'd been through with mum actually was now starting to unravel and affect me in a negative way. So what was happening when I would be on the run, I was pretty much subconsciously, like, identifying that pain, again, still with the emotional pain, but I wasn't able to utilize that to my advantage. It was shutting me down. So I'd get the physiological effects of the dry reaching, and mentally I just, the body naturally fight or flight. I was like, it slowed me down. I was quite happy to stay more in that comfortable part. So what actually happened was, once I had identified this, I then went back to when I would train running and, like, worked on small things like, who am I running for now? Am I running for me? This is after Rio, I'd been to the Paralympics, and this is the whole connection, I guess, with identity and self-worth. And it actually is a huge part around probably where I was at in my career as to why I probably chose to retire now, because I'd done that work even pre-COVID around who was I as an athlete and who was I doing it for. And most of the time we are doing it for ourselves, but I'm pretty sure a lot of us do stuff because we don't feel good enough, or our parents will be proud of us if we do that, or if we keep striving, more people are going to love us. That's that ego coming in. And I initially thought, oh, I hope I do like doing this, because that's going to be a big bummer if I actually am out running here and I actually don't even like what I'm doing. but it was great because I was out running and I'm like, I do like doing this. This is really good. Like, and so I worked on that process, and I actually had to work through it, taking it to training, so that it wasn't just going straight out and then putting into practice with the race. But I learned to do something for me, not because, it was for my mum and realized that I actually loved it. And like, Kate, it's okay. This space is okay. You're not going to get hurt, And so that emotion, I could start to sort of let go of the emotional baggage. I don't really want to use that word, but I guess it sort of makes it a bit more like we can understand that word quite well. And I was running free. So when that was happening, I could then I had more confidence. I'm like, hey, you can do this. You are a runner. You like it. You want to be here. So once we start to know that, I was like, okay, that makes my whole world a lot easier to be in. And so when I would get into that pain threshold, it's like, okay, Kate, this is pain. It's temporary, but it's not. So I didn't have to subconsciously think it was connected to anything in my past or my mum or anything like that. And I was able to then work through the process of performance, and it was really breaking that race down and getting from here to there and then there to there, and what that was technically. So basically it was to be able to deal with all that stuff, which often we don't realize even can impact us as athletes and in lives in general. It got rid of all the grey crap in my head, and I was able just to run. Like, people say it's so simple, just run. And I'm like, well, just go and talk, go and speak in public speaking, or just go apply for the job. Like, it's just simple. It's not hard, but it is. Like, for different reasons for many people, things are complex. We are complex beings. And I've always been very interested in mindfulness. But when COVID hit, I really had to practice what I preached and really embrace more of the formal mindful meditation. But as an athlete, I was all about mindfulness when I race. So our heart rate is so high, but my breath was my anchor point that would bring me back to center. And so when I was a bit clearer mentally, I was able to then really utilize the breath and just go with it. And to be honest, I did get those points physically where I felt a little bit sick when I was racing because I was really pushing myself. But I was automatically, instantly able to check in with that and go, you're okay, Kate, you're okay. And so that was instantly, it was amazing. And I was able to push through it. And to be honest, that last race, I took 1:30 off my run time on that course. And that is no denying, a lot of that was physical. But definitely the mental stuff was going to make or break that performance. So, it was amazing stuff that, and to have the opportunity to work with my sports psych through that, it was. So now I go running and I love it, ironically. It only took my whole career in sport to then retire to love something that I was doing. But, the last few months I navigated through that, and it's amazing. It was pretty cool to get there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just by you explaining this process, it sounds like a lot of work mentally, even before you get to the physical. What percentage would you give the mental aspect of the sport compared to the physical side?
I think I don't really want to give it a weighting because it's definitely both parts, but there are times, and I think you have to embrace both. I think it's more around the awareness of how the mental elements of performance can impact us. And so, and I probably want to highlight the word awareness. It's not necessarily about saying, okay, mentally think about the process when you're running or the tactics and strategy when you're out there racing, which we need to do. But it's more having an awareness of ourselves and what's going on internally as well as externally in the moment to be able to then utilize that to our advantage, if that makes sense. So I feel in in sport specifically that it's a bit underutilized. Like performance psychology, yes, it is, but building the individual from a self-worth and identity perspective isn't done enough pre-retirement. And it has a time and a place. Like you wouldn't want to work on vulnerability in an athlete leading into a race. So with me and my psych, we didn't work on stuff like specific to grief and my mum's passing when I was coming into a big race. We would be focused specifically on the performance stuff. But if you're not vulnerable and if you're not really peeling back your layers, you're not getting that opportunity. And I always think it is opportunity, you know. Yes, it's not great to be like, you almost feel naked emotionally when you're being vulnerable, but you learn how to reflect and what are you learning about yourself in the moment, how you process emotions, and you can then pick up more on the negative thinking. I believe athletes out there don't realise when if they don't have a good day, they might just think, oh, I didn't train enough. And that's probably not it at all. You probably overtrained for one. But what were you thinking at the time, or what have you been going through? And this stuff doesn't naturally come to people to think about what else is going on in their life or what they were thinking in the moment. So in short, it's both. I mean, you definitely can't be a good athlete if you're not fit. Definitely not in triathlon. And, you know, that plays a part mentally in being able to push through it. Triathletes are amazing in the sense of how much they train through fatigue and balancing that to not be injured. But there's so much more mentally, I think, that we can tap into aside from the amazing stuff with performance psychology.
Right. Because you mentioned, you know, the stuff about your mom and her passing, and, you know, also the fact that, you know, you, by hook or by crook, you wanted to fulfill that common bond of going to the Olympics. But with equestrian, you know, there was the added complication of traveling with an animal who doesn't travel well. So I have two questions with regard to that. Number one, was that one of the reasons why you transitioned to another sport? And number two, after going to the Olympics, did you get closure?
So the first one about transitioning was, so I did transition. My mum passed away in 2010, and then I was a slow transition out of the sport. It took me about, and that's the other thing, like realizing you want to retire. Like if someone says they're going to retire like next week, now I'm done, I'd be more cautious about that. Someone saying quickly that I'm really happy about retiring, as opposed to someone that takes 4 years to figure it out, because they're thinking about it, you know, and they're probably going to make the right decision when they come to it. So in short, yeah, for me, it took about 4 years after Mum died to really navigate my way out of the sport. I've always felt my motto in life is no regrets, and I didn't want to lose opportunities in the sport. So I continued to ride. I stood down from international competition probably about 2011, and didn't campaign for London Games because of my horse being unwell. So for the travel. So it did play a factor in it, but also not having my mum around, you know, was really hard. And I was losing a bit of that passion and that love for it, and wasn't losing the passion and the love for my horse. He unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but just a beautiful soul, and I really miss that connection I had with him. And triathlon, you know, a really, really interesting part and really important thing not to be underplayed is the mental health element to exercise. And I was grieving. I wasn't in a good place. I didn't have that structure and routine as much as I had always had with sport and equestrian and the international competitions and the planning for the world champs and the 4-year cycle of the games. And I was in like a bit of almost like, you know, putting a kid in a candy shop saying, but with a bomb at the same time, you know, like do whatever you want, but you're going to, like, the place is going to explode at the same time. That's kind of what it was like. So I was out socializing all the time and partying and just sort of embracing this lifestyle I could never really get into too much because of my sport, but then was grieving. So it was a double-edged sword in a way. And it was just on that mental health roller coaster of just getting a bit of poor health, and my depression and anxiety really elevated. And so I took to exercising. As I said before, I didn't really like running, so I slowly started to try and just figure out what that was. I was always shy of a gym because everyone was so fit in a gym. I didn't want to go in there. And I just actually joined like a local personal training, like small community gym. And I actually initially did it because it made me feel better. So yeah, I think, yeah, so the navigating out of the into triathlon, if my mum hadn't passed away, I don't know, I think I would have probably retired from equestrian at some point, but I don't know to what level I would have taken up triathlon. I probably would have given it a go. I think the opportunity was there at the time. So, you know, I was single and I could do whatever I wanted, really. So I chose to just pursue it. And it gets a bit more complex when you add more people into the mix. And then, so Rio. So when I was when we raced, they introduce every athlete. And when they said, here's Kate, my maiden name's Doughty, here comes Kate Doughty, it was another amazing experience, but the timing was just shocking because I literally, as soon as they called my name out to go out to the starting pontoon in the water, this whole weight, it felt physically like this whole weight just lifted off my shoulders. And I was not expecting that. And I kind of, at the end of the race is fine. I couldn't care if I fell apart, and I just wanted to sit down. And I had this moment of like, oh my God, I have to race now. Like, and I'm not just racing at a local race. I'm at the games. Like, Kate, you got to get your shit together. And it was hard because all of it was there. So everything I've spoken about with the grief and the emotion, put that into the biggest race of your career and all these people and fans screaming and yelling and the hate and the fact that you represent your country, like it was a lot to take in. And I actually had an amazing race in the sense that I came out of the water in third, but then everything started to just the fatigue, and I think it was more the emotional side of it that got me. And I was actually, like, the reality was I hadn't even been in the sport for 2 years, so I was very, I guess, still immature as an athlete physically. So I hadn't pushed myself to where I had in the last 3-4 years post Rio. So I was definitely a lot better athlete now. So from a physical perspective, I was young, right? So I finished 5th, and you know, I reckon I hadn't done much work mentally either with my mum and losing mum. So I think if I had maybe done a bit more work then, I could have held on to that bronze medal. But then the other side to that is maybe not, because I had to just go through the grief and just live through it, right? You can't just switch it off. So to answer your question, I did get closure. But how do you get closure? Like, there's no timeline on losing a loved one, right? And there's always challenges through that. And I've definitely done it, but I loved the sport, and I was definitely continuing to Tokyo. If anything, I probably wish I'd started triathlon a lot earlier because I love it. And I think I got closure too the more I just learned to cut myself some slack. Like, I didn't have to be winning for people to love me or to get approval or feel good about it, or like, it's all right just to be.
Yeah.
And so I've got more closure from that.
Right. 2 years of training and getting fifth in the games. I mean, that's impressive in and of itself. So yeah, I guess hence the reason why you probably wish you had done it earlier. But still, I mean, not many people can say what you've done and accomplished.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not going to deny, like, I still think Tokyo could have been like, and you can't hold on to the what ifs and the so forth, and but I would have given a really good crack, and it's, who knows, but I did have my gold medal race, a few months
Yeah.
ago, so I kind of did it for myself. And all that matters is what you do it for you. It wasn't about anyone else. At the end of the day, I know athletes that have been retired for a long time, post their career, and they've got gold medals and they've got games medals, and they're like, you know what, it doesn't change you, it doesn't make anything better or easier post sport. And that's a real, like, wow, so whatever you're doing, especially as a sport or a career, like, do it for you, not for anyone else.
Yeah, that's a really important lesson, which I think is a nice segue to the questions I have around like how you learn. Because when I was researching and some of the interviews you've done, you talk about how how you learn by surrounding yourself with the people in the sport. Was there anything specific you were looking to absorb from them, and also how what do you think is the best way to learn from your peers?
I think it's to be open-minded, and don't, like, let everyone have their opinion. Doesn't have to be the same as yours. Doesn't mean they're a bad person or they're wrong. But if you don't allow conversation and understanding around other people's opinions, you're never going to see anything in a different way. So you're going to be so rigid in your thought processes and your understandings and your learning. So for me, I had to acknowledge that I may not have made Rio, like that was the reality of it all. But I also knew I had tools mentally and an experience and understanding of what it meant to be a high performance athlete. So I knew it was going to take dedication and commitment and time, and so I knew how to apply myself from that perspective. But I also was like going back to kindergarten. I was in a sport, so I wasn't going in there pretending to be a hero. So I guess my point there is, don't go into somewhere, thinking that I know it all, and it's actually okay if you don't, right? Because you're going to learn more quicker if you acknowledge that yourself, because you'll ask the right questions. And for me, it was about just surrounding myself with people that knew the sport, could teach me the sport, and I was surrounding myself with people that were just age groupers doing it for fun, to high performance coaches, to people at the Australian Institute of Sport, to pro level athletes, to just anyone, because it was new to me. And there is a risk to that, because if you're new to something, you're going to believe everything, majority that, everyone can be an expert at times.
Right.
So it takes a bit of experience and your own navigating through something to realize what is right for you, and what is actually true, because you other people feed off being an expert, I guess, or helping other people to serve their own ego. And that's one thing I learned along the way. And I just learn. I'm constantly learning and asking questions and driving people mad. But that was the way I could do that. And if there was an opportunity to better myself, I would take it if it was possible. So.
But how did you navigate, like you mentioned, those people who are ego-driven, who might not give you the right advice? I mean, you talk about experience, but what is it about experience that helps you decipher the charlatans, so to speak?
Well, I think it can be what the outcomes as well. So unfortunately, there were things I probably would have done differently pre-Rio, or like later on. I think you once you learn and grow in an environment or industry or sport for that matter, like you learn what works best for you, like what coaching, what sort of feedback you like, the style of learning. So when I say navigate through that is you don't know until you've tried stuff. So you just have to try and accept if like failures, I don't like that word, but if something doesn't go to plan, like for me, I could sit back and look at Rio and go, I should have done more strength in the gym. I probably, maybe I shouldn't have gone to the acclimatizing. I was in heat for too long. So there were so many things I could look at, but why? Like, it's not going to change the outcome, right? What did I learn from it? So I learned X, Y, Z. Then you take from those experiences into where you go next. So I think that's the only way you can really decipher who is right or wrong for you, unless someone is actually putting you at risk, like physically or mentally, like straight up, then no, that's not right. But yeah, it's definitely just through experience. So you just have to be really open-minded.
Right. I'm curious because in a sport like triathlon, well, I suppose in any sport, it's a really physical endeavor and it requires a lot of hard work. And every time, I mean, for the layman like us, people always say, oh, it's all in the mind. You have to push your boundary. But I mean, theoretically, at some point, that type of advice, is not realistic, right? Because you can do a lot more harm than good. So, I'm wondering if you have any advice when it comes to things like that. And this is just for me, I suppose.
Yeah, I think if you put that into the context of life as well. So as athletes, as elite athletes, we, being our best, especially triathletes, like if you just keep pushing and pushing, you risk injury as well. And that sets you back a lot. And the thing that people got to remember is elite athletes have expert elite coaches, and they manage what we do. A big part of what we do and to be able to perform our best is the recovery side of it. So we were training 3 sessions a day, and it's the in-between time, which I struggle with a lot more after having a baby. Like, I was doing my last season last year, traveling the world, breastfeeding. I don't recommend it. But so you need to have the downtime, and you need to be able to, so physically that's for the body as well, but my biggest thing is also mentally. So switch off from stuff, it's going to be there to continue with, and even if it's just like a micro rest or going for a walk. But that's where that mindfulness for me was really good, because physically it has benefits long term with stress, and mentally it just allows you to reset. So my biggest thing is we push, but we train to push on that day. We don't race. We're not racing every day. We're training to be, we're training to execute it on a particular day. So we're not on all the time. We don't want to be on all the time, because we're not going to be able to perform when we're racing. And that takes time and a skill too. And you got to navigate through that, because often we think more is better, and it's not always the case. And I learn a lot too. Post Rio with my coach as well, that a lot of for me, like, my fitness was more just aerobic endurance stuff, so just longer running, and it wasn't speed stuff every day. And that's like life, we get fitter and better the slower we go over time. So when we have to be on, we're on. So that's probably, that's what I could take from that, and relating it to elements outside of sport.
Right. Just a sidetrack, because I tend to sleep a lot. So my wife always says, like, you're not even doing anything, and I'm like, oh, it's recovery, but I don't really do it.
I probably would be a real pain in the bum for you, because we're like, get up. So there is you can't sleep all day.
I know.
When I say have a nap, like have a 15-minute nap.
Yeah, I know. I think that's my wife's biggest pet peeve about me, because like when I sleep, I'm dead, like it's just
Yeah.
it's impossible to wake me up.
Yeah.
So I'm mindful of your time. So I just wanted to ask, two reflective questions before we
Sure.
we end the podcast. I'm curious, like what is the life lesson that, has taken you the longest to learn?
Yeah, great question. Oh, just lost my
Oh, good. Oh,
ear. You got me?
yes.
I think oh, I'm constantly learning. Hey, I think that's one element to that, I guess, is you're always learning. You'll think something's right and the way it should be, and then you maybe realize later on that, oh, hang on, this is better. So to be kind to myself and be open-minded. But I think what's taken me a lot of time in my time on this earth to date is probably really just letting go of the worrying about what other people think of me. And realizing that more often not, people are more worried about their own internal struggles than worrying about me or what I'm doing, and to realize that no one's perfect and we don't always have to. Well, I definitely don't always have to be, striving for everything. But yeah, I think that's probably been my hardest lesson learned, is to have confidence in myself.
Yeah.
And that's that's definitely been the hardest.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And and I think more important than, for me at least, is having confidence when other people don't have confidence in you. I think
Yeah.
that for me is the hardest part, because I can, certain things I would consider myself really confident, but then every now and then when someone says, "Oh, I don't know, Nick," then I start to doubt myself, and that for me is also a really, it's kind of a continual lesson for me to kind of separate that.
Yeah, I can relate to that too, especially for me. Like, I was so used to sport and being told what to do, and you're like, okay, what you say is right, I'll do that. And then as I got older, I'm like, I was automatically kind of doing that in life as well. I'm like, oh, they say that's not good to do. Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm like, hang on, I don't think that's the right answer. And I totally agree with that. And yeah, I think also the biggest thing too, on that, I guess, big learning is that we don't let fear get in the way of what we want to try and do. So for me, there was so much around being outside of my comfort zone when it came to trying triathlon, and they led to some of the most amazing opportunities in my life. And I think, don't let that hold you back. I think some of the biggest risks in life you take can lead to the most amazing opportunities. So as long as you're not putting yourself in some way of like physical or mental harm, don't worry about being challenged and being vulnerable. Like, you're going to be okay. Just go with it. Letting go. Sometimes you just got to let go. Just surrender
Absolutely.
to the now. And that's, definitely, that's probably about a million lessons learned, but
Yeah.
they're probably key ones.
Yeah, I 100% agree. What advice would you, I mean, you have a young son. What advice would you give him, especially now, you've got this experience of, hey, preparing for Tokyo Olympics, and then COVID cuts that short, and then all of a sudden, you've made the decision to retire. I mean, there's so much uncertainty in the world. What
Yeah.
advice would you give him so that he can better prepare for the world out there?
Run. No, just kidding.
Where?
Yeah, exactly. You can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard, we just always want to be making sure our kids are okay. And I want him to feel confident knowing that he is capable of doing whatever he wants, and he doesn't have to do something he doesn't want to do. But him knowing that if he feels he's not good at something, it doesn't mean that he can't be good at it. So it's really, I guess, for him to be that way, it really comes down to that development of a growth mindset. So him to realize that through effort, perseverance and, learning through setbacks. We can still get there, and we can achieve, and learning and embracing effort, and being inspired by others' success. Don't get angry if your mate is smashing it at something and you're still a little bit behind. I think that's key. And probably that being vulnerable is okay. Our emotions are there for a reason. Having them sometimes doesn't always serve us in a positive way, what we are feeling. But for him to realise that it's okay to talk about it. And I think this is good in this day and age. This stuff around mental health is coming forward. But when I was younger, I didn't really get it, because we didn't talk about it. So I don't really know. You just navigate life and being a teenager and all the crap that can come with that at times. So I would like him, if he came home after school one day and said, "Hey, Mum, I was feeling anxious today."
Oh, wow.
And then, I come home and say that to my husband. He's like, "Okay." Like, that's not good. Because it's just my normal way of talking. Like, it neutralizes it, right?
Right.
And the more we talk about it, the more it makes it okay for someone else who's going through it to talk about it. So I don't mind if he comes home and said, "Oh, this made me anxious," because then he's understanding his feelings. And then it allows us to have that awareness about going back to, are we just having a negative thought, or what is it? So I would like him to be able to figure that out, which could probably take his whole life to do. But hey, he's hoping.
Well, it takes everyone a lifetime to figure that out. But the good thing is he has a good role model to emulate. But before I forget, I realized I didn't ask you a question I really wanted to ask. What is a unique experience that you have as a Paralympian that people might not notice or appreciate?
Yeah, good one. I think there's a couple probably like misconceptions maybe around Paralympic sport. Probably one is that just because someone has a disability doesn't mean they can be a Paralympian. Athletes who go to the Paralympics yes, they have disabilities, but they are true athletes in their own right. They train just as much as their counterparts, that we say able-bodied athletes, and more often than not, they're in the same training environments. So you definitely can't just go to the Paralympics. It's not just like saying, "I'm going to go to the Olympics." So it takes hard work, and it's not always clear cut. You don't always make the team. One thing I am proud about being a Paralympian and someone with disability is that unless you have a disability, and we have to be like friends and have a really good sort of friendship, you can't make jokes at me about me not having a hand. Only I can do that.
Right.
And I think a funny little moment was once we were at a training camp in America before Rio, and we all wanted the front seat. We all wanted a shotgun. And I was like, I'm a shotgun because I don't have a hand. And then my friend's like, no, I need a shotgun because I'm missing my lower leg, so I need to stretch it out. And then someone else is like, I need a shotgun, I can't see. And I'm like, huh? And then it's like, my friend's like, oh, but I'm in a wheelchair. And I'm like, but you can't even feel your legs. Why do you need the front seat? And it's those sort of remarks and feedback that you only have authority to do so when you're in that community. And that's what I love about Paralympic sport. And I think, it's amazing to be a part of the movement. Like, if you think about it, going to the Paralympic Games, you have got people from all these different countries with so many different disabilities, and they're all in like the one area. And like, this is amazing. And there's still a long way to go with Paralympic sport. I think one thing is really good for people to know is that majority, if not all, of the sports don't get prize money or the funding as able-bodied sports. And para in the word Paralympics actually means parallel, not paraplegic or paralytic. And
I just found that out last week, actually, after I watched
really?
that Netflix documentary, The Rising Phoenix. That was what I didn't know.
Yeah, what a great documentary. And that is like, that just that awareness is what needs to be getting out there more. And it's if it means parallel, let's get it to that point of being parallel. And with the Commonwealth Games, we saw last time it was on in Australia in Gold Coast, I think it was probably one of the first times they combined able-bod and para sports, and it was a huge success. So granted, we've got COVID and different events going on, but for me, in my triathlon and equestrian crew, actually, our world championships were combined, and that's awesome. And it's great. So I think there's a lot to embrace there. And I also too, I think most of the time, if you don't know something about someone's disability, more often than not, we get scared of saying the wrong thing, so we don't say anything at all. But just ask, more often than not, someone's more than happy to talk about it, or appreciates the curiosity.
Right. That's awesome. That's a great insight. Well, Kate, thank you so much for spending time with me. I know it was hard to arrange this, so I really appreciate you.
Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I learned so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity, and to be able to have a chat.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love to keep in touch, and maybe, in your next endeavor, especially as a psychologist, we can sit down and have a conversation around that.
Yeah, I'd love to. Look, there's lots of things, as you can probably tell them, I like to have a chat about stuff, especially when they're deep. And let's, we're definitely still in that time of uncertainty. So with COVID and then the world of sport, let's see what pans out, and more than happy to catch up and chat again.
Yeah, sounds good, Kate. Cheers.
Beautiful.